South Africa has plenty to celebrate this morning. Athletes put on some stunning performances at the Grand Prix in Potchefstoom. Caster Semenya, Akani Simbine, Clarence Munyai, Stephen Mokoka and Zenay van der Walt were just some of the highlights. Our reporter, Hlonim Timkulu, was at that event and joins us now live for a quick chat out of Potchefstoom. Very good morning to you, Hloni. So, any surprises from last night's event, last night's meeting that we, should have been looking out for?
Good morning, Morena. So we are at the Kenneth MacArthur Stadium in Potchefstoom in the northwest, where festivities happened last night at that third ASA Grand Prix Series meet. In terms of surprises, I think the big one would probably be, and I wouldn't say it's a surprise necessarily, but I think I saw on social media especially that people were a little bit shocked that Akani only finished 7th in his 200 meters. So first of all, he is more a 100 meter specialist than a 200, right? And secondly, he hadn't raced since last year, so he did admit that he himself is rusty. So, but I suppose that is a surprise. You always expect that Akani will win. So that was the one surprise. But everything else, Caster won her 2,000 meter race quite convincingly in a very good time as well. So there was no surprise there. In the women's 400 meter hurdles, actually, I wouldn't say it was a surprise, but Taylor Beeld won, and then Zenay van der Walt was second, and Venda Nel was third. So that's not a surprise because the three ladies have kind of always, for the past, say, year or two, kind of been in contention with each other over the distance and over the specific race. So the one surprise, I guess I would say, is definitely Akani. But others went to form. Of the big races, those went to form. We had a pretty exciting 200 meters, that's 200 meters, and the 100 meters actually with Fernando Omanyala from Kenya alongside Clarence Munyai and a few others. So yeah, I guess Akani would be the one major surprise.
Now, of course, then, Hloni, the question would be asked, as you mentioned, that social media was quite taken aback, people on social media taken aback by that Akani result, and maybe even the Venda Nel result, even though you're saying that the three ladies have been in competition with each other over some time. How then would you say the top athletes are taking this Grand Prix seriously, the third edition seriously, considering there is so much else that's going to be happening later on this year?
Yeah, I think because of COVID, or since COVID, the athletics calendar, and I mean much of sport as well, or some sport anyway, has kind of shifted a little bit in terms of when things start and how they progress, right? Usually we wouldn't have the ASA Grand Prix meets, the third one out of 5 in April. We usually have them starting in March, and then now we just be preparing for the nationals. But we have a fourth ASA Grand Prix meet happening in Germiston next week, and there's a fifth one that's happening in May, actually, after the nationals. And this we spoke to James Muloi, ASA president, yesterday about. He says it's to give athletes a chance to qualify for all these events. And the issue, it's not an issue, but the concern this year is that you have the African champs that are happening in June, you have the world champs that are happening in July, at the beginning of July, and then you have the Commonwealth Games that are starting at the end of July into August. So it's a pretty busy year for athletes, and everything is quite compacted. And of course we know that usually in May the Diamond League, the European season, or the international outdoor season starts for athletes, so there's a lot to kind of try and squeeze in, and with athletes trying to qualify. Now with that 7th place in the 200 meters, we spoke to Akani just about the compacted season, and this is what he had to say.
I've started off the season on a different note. This year is different for me. It's just making sure that I'm ready for African champs and ready for world champs and African and Commonwealth Games. So that's where we're at. That's where the mindset is at. It's to be competing in South Africa, but not to be at my best here in South Africa. So it's just a different take that we're doing, and it's just trusting coach.
So, Hloni, Akani is saying that he wants to compete in South Africa, but not necessarily be at his best in South Africa. That's perhaps an idea of how he's going to be managing his very tight calendar. How else are the other athletes, the big athletes, the Casters, for example, are going to be handling this year's calendar?
Yeah, we were talking last night about Caster specifically that, she had said last year already, at the end of last year, that she was concentrating on the 5,000 meters for the World Champs because that's what she's eligible to run, right? But so far this season, she's run a 5,000 meters, she's run a 3,000 meters, and she's run a 2,000 meters that she did last night. So it's quite interesting where she goes and what she does there. But again, also with Agani running the 200 meters when he's a 100 meter specialist. But this is what we've seen before. I remember last season with Wade van Niekerk as well, when we weren't sure what he was going to be doing at the Olympics. Would he be doing, because he then started running the 200 meters, and we were like, okay, are you going to go for a 2 and a 400 meter double, or what are you going to do? But it is still kind of not early in the season, but this is kind of building up the season for the athletes when they kind of mix it up while they kind of get into gear. Some of the training they're not letting us in on, of course, it just depends. I can't just say that it will depend on what his coach Vanna Prinsloo says is next for him, because we were trying to work out, is he running next week in Germiston? But of course there is the essay. So just in terms of managing the calendar, it is going to be interesting because there is so much happening in such a short space of time. But it is what ASA President James Moloi says they are thinking about, that's why they extended the calendar, that they have races in May. We saw even last year with athletes trying to qualify for the Tokyo Games that they did have races late in the season in May as well. They had a race in Durban, I remember, and in Cape Town. And that's not normal for us to be having races then, because normally then after the nationals, athletes are then set to go to Europe for the Diamond League season and all these other meets. So they're trying to manage it, ASA says, but it's going to be interesting over the next few weeks to see what the athletes actually decide to do. And we'll see when they actually turn out for these events, more than what we can kind of try and predict, I think.
All right, Sloni, thank you very much. It is definitely going to be an interesting one as to how Athletics South Africa manages the calendar along with their athletes to see how ready and how well prepared they're going to be, because in at least 2-3 months space of time, there's going to be so many events, the Africa Champs, the World Champs, and of course, the most important one for all the athletes, I would imagine, the Commonwealth Games happening in July.